And joining us now from the Loyola University Maryland Selinger School of Business is Karyl Leggio, Professor of Finance. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Our topic is activist investors. What does that mean? What makes them activists?
Well, if you remember back 10, 15 years ago, that movie Wall Street with Gordon Gekko, Michael Douglas played Gordon Gekko.
Greed is good?
Greed is good, yeah, that's right. He was a corporate raider. Well, corporate raiders is a type of activist investors. Essentially what happens is you have a hedge fund typically that looks at companies that have not been performing well. And so they've been underperforming, and the hedge fund believes that they can generate additional value, and they buy up a small percentage of the company's shares, typically 5 to 10% on the open market. And then they typically seek a proxy fight and attempt to get a couple of seats on the board to change the activity that the firm has been involved in the hopes of trying to cause the stock price to go up.
Probably don't have the greatest reputation as a group. What are the pros and cons of activist investors doing their thing?
Okay. Well, the reason activist investors have come about is because you and I, as investors and stockholders, we're pretty lazy. We don't pay enough attention to what the management team is doing and how the board is monitoring them. So the activists have come in and have said, you can do better. And that often means the CEO is going to disappear. It means that they may sell some divisions. They may decide that the company isn't financed properly. They need more debt because debt's a cheap source of financing. They may decide the company is holding too much cash. They did this with Apple a few years ago, and you either need to pay a dividend or start a stock buyback. So the role of the activist investor is to try to get the stock price to go up, and clearly the activist owns 5 or 10% of the company, and they profit on that stock growth.
How often did they do something successful in terms of realizing new value, as opposed to doing something that maybe disrupts a logical long-term corporate plan? Okay.
Well, it depends on the deal. So if you look in general, the results have shown that the vast majority of activist investors create value for the companies, but it comes at a price, and it's not always successful. So you can take a look at JCPenney a few years ago. They had been down 65% over the past few years. An activist came in, brought in a new CEO. The new CEO changed the whole makeup of the company. They wanted to get rid of discounting. They wanted to get rid of competing on price, and they went down further. So it really damaged JCPenney. Look at Sears and Kmart right now. Sears bought Kmart, instituted a whole new leadership structure, and you're seeing the closures that are occurring, and they're on the brink of bankruptcy as well. So there are plenty of examples of failures, but there's also some examples of tremendous successes where they caused companies to divest different divisions and lead to a lot of value creation. But it's disruptive.
What's typically in the toolkit for an activist investor once they've gotten to that 5% stake or whatever, and pick up the phone to the CEO?
Okay, so the proxy fight's huge. They typically do sit down with the CEO, and the CEO will bring his lawyers with him to have a conversation. And for the most part, CEOs are smart to listen to the activist because the ideas are often very good. But the next step the activist takes is hit the media. And heaven forbid if you're a CEO who recently bought another corporate jet, because that's going to come out very quickly. So the activist investor goes directly to the media. They'll appear on the morning news shows on a regular basis. And the goal is to generate a lot of support from other investors who will back them and help them get some seats on the board.
How does management typically respond when they see somebody accumulating shares and they go public? Do they barricade the barbarians at the gates? Do they close the gates? What do they do?
Well, first of all, this is really common. So if you look, about 50% of the companies that are on the S&P 500 have an activist that's in their registry right now. So that doesn't mean they're active yet, but they're holding shares. About 1 in 7 companies in the S&P 500 have an activist act within about a 5-year period. So it's very common. As a CEO, the first thing you've got to do is be a bit reflective. Is he right? Is there something that we can be doing that would keep him from forcing himself onto the board? So are there things that we can do to listen to the activists? And if not, how do you protect yourself? Well, if you have a board that's cohesive, that helps. If you have a strategic plan and you've been acting towards the plan, then you're likely to ward off the activists. Pepsi did this a few years ago. Activists came in, wanted them to buy part of Kraft Foods and then spin off 2 divisions. Well, the CEO had been very successful. She had a plan in place. The plans typically don't happen within a quarter's time. It may take up to 5 years to actually see some results, and shareholders don't tend to be very patient. So, getting your board aligned, telling the story to the shareholders on what you're trying to accomplish, that helps a lot in warding off the barbarians.
Is this an American thing? Is it mostly in the United States that we have these roaming gangs of activist investors?
It used to. It used to be just really a U.S. phenomenon, but you're seeing more and more in Europe, particularly in the UK. You're seeing a good number of activists rearing up in Europe at this point.
Professor Karyl Leggio of the Loyola University Maryland Selinger School of Business, thank you for your time.
Thank you as well.